"You dare look at me like that?" she snapped, her eyes sharp and challenging. I did look away. I smiled and said softly, "Because you're beautiful." For a second she looked stunned, like no one had ever answered her like that before. "You don't even know me," she scoffed, crossing her arms, but her voice wasn't as harsh anymore. I shrugged a little and replied, "Maybe, but sometimes you can see a story in someone's eyes." She stared at me, trying to hold that tough attitude, yet I could see it cracking. "So what story do you see in mine?" she asked, quieter now. I paused, took a breath, and said gently, "Someone pretending to be strong so nobody notices she's hurting." Her eyes widened, the anger melting into silence. For a moment she looked like she might cry, then she laughed softly and shook her head. "You're strange," she whispered. I smiled again and said, "Maybe, but I had to say it, Pa." She studied my face for a long second and finally asked, "Why?" I hesitated, then replied, "Because you remind me of someone." "Ba, who?" she asked. I swallowed hard and said, "The girl I lost, the one I promised I'd never ignore again." And suddenly, for the first time, she didn't look angry at all, she just looked understood. I was just walking across the campus courtyard when it happened. The afternoon sun was low, the air warm, and people were passing by like any ordinary day. I wasn't really paying attention to anything until my eyes accidentally met hers. She was standing near the fountain, leaning against the railing with an expression that looked like the whole world annoyed her. Our eyes locked for a second longer than they should have. That's when she straightened up and walked straight toward me, her steps quick and confident, like she was already angry before reaching me. She stopped right in front of me, close enough that I could see the sharp determination in her eyes. Then she said, almost like a challenge, "You dare look at me like that?" For a moment I was surprised, but I didn't step back. Something about the way she said it made me smile instead. I tilted my head slightly and replied calmly, "Because you're beautiful." The words slipped out before I even thought about them. Her eyebrows lifted immediately, clearly not expecting that answer. She folded her arms and looked at me like she was trying to figure out if I was joking or just crazy. "You don't even know me?" she said sharply. I shrugged lightly. "Maybe not," I said, "but sometimes you don't need to know someone to see something real." She stared at me like she wanted to argue, but for some reason she didn't walk away. Her posture was still defensive, yet the anger in her face seemed less certain now. "Oh, really?" she said, narrowing her eyes slightly. "And what exactly do you think you see?" I paused for a second, studying her expression. Most people would have looked away by now, but I couldn't. There was something hidden behind that tough attitude, something fragile she was trying very hard to hide. I took a slow breath before answering. "Honestly," I said quietly. She raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I see someone pretending to be strong." I continued, my voice calm, "because she doesn't want anyone to notice she's hurting." The moment the words left my mouth, the atmosphere changed. Her confident stance froze. For a brief second her eyes widened, like I had accidentally stepped into a place she kept locked away. The attitude in her face didn't disappear immediately, but it cracked just enough for me to notice the truth behind it. She looked away first, glancing toward the fountain like she suddenly found the water very interesting. Then she let out a small laugh, the kind people use when they don't know how else to react. "You're strange," she said, shaking her head slowly. "Maybe," I replied, smiling soft. She turned back toward me again, studying my face now instead of challenging it. The tension between us had changed. A moment ago she looked like she wanted to fight me. Now she just looked curious. "So you just go around analyzing strangers?" she asked. "Not really," I said, "just the interesting ones." She rolled her eyes slightly, but there was the faintest hint of a smile trying to appear. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. People continued walking around us, the normal sounds of campus life filling the air, but it felt like the world had quietly moved a little farther away from where we were standing. Then she asked something softer, something that sounded more real than anything she had said before. "Why would you even say that to me?" Her voice wasn't aggressive anymore. It almost sounded careful. I hesitated. For the first time since the strange conversation started, I wasn't sure what to say. My chest felt tight, like a memory had suddenly opened somewhere inside me. She noticed the pause and frowned slightly. "What?" she said. "Did I scare the confidence out of you?" I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "It's just—" She waited. I looked at her again, really looked this time. The same guarded eyes, the same defensive energy, the same silent pain she thought nobody could see. My voice dropped a little as I finally answered. "You remind me of someone." Her expression shifted again. "Who?" she asked. For a second, the courtyard around us faded into a blur of noise and movement. A memory pushed forward in my mind, one I usually tried not to think about. I swallowed before speaking again. "The girl I lost," I said quietly. She blinked, surprised. "The one I promised I'd never ignore again," I finished. The words hung in the air between us. For the first time since she walked up to confront me, she didn't look angry, defensive, or sarcastic. She just looked quiet, like something inside her understood what I meant without needing any more explanation. She studied my face for a long moment, and then something unexpected happened. Her shoulders relaxed. The hard expression she had been wearing since the beginning slowly faded away. And when she finally spoke again, her voice was gentle. "Maybe," she said softly, "you're not as strange as I thought." I was walking through the crowded street that evening, the sky painted in soft shades of orange as the sun slowly disappeared behind the buildings. People rushed past me, cars honked in the distance, and the world felt like it was moving too fast for anyone to notice anyone else. I probably would have kept walking like everyone else if my eyes hadn't met hers. She was standing near a small cafe entrance, leaning against the wall with a look that said she didn't want anyone bothering her. But somehow, for a brief moment, we locked eyes. It wasn't even intentional. Just a glance. Yet before I could look away, she pushed herself off the wall and started walking straight toward me with determined steps. I could already tell this wasn't going to be a normal conversation. She stopped right in front of me, her expression sharp and confident, like she was ready to challenge me before I even spoke. Her eyebrows tightened slightly as she looked directly into my eyes and said in a bold, almost irritated tone, "You dare look at me like that?" For a second, I could feel the tension in the air between us. Most people probably would have apologized or awkwardly looked away, but something about the situation made me calm instead of nervous. I studied her expression for a moment, noticing the fire in her eyes and the way she carried herself like someone who had learned not to trust strangers easily. Instead of reacting defensively, I simply smiled, not a mocking smile, not a nervous one, just a calm and genuine smile. Then I answered in a steady voice, "Because you're beautiful." The words hung in the air for a moment, unexpected and disarming. Her expression changed instantly. She clearly wasn't prepared for that answer. Her eyes widened just slightly before she quickly tried to regain her tough attitude. She crossed her arms and tilted her head, staring at me like she was trying to figure out if I was serious or just trying to be clever. "You don't even know me," she said sharply, though her voice had already lost a little of its edge. I shrugged lightly, still relaxed. "That's true," I said, "but sometimes you don't need to know someone for years to notice something special." She squinted at me suspiciously, clearly trying to maintain control of the conversation. "Special," she repeated. "You looked at me for 2 seconds." I chuckled softly. "2 seconds can be enough," I replied calmly. She looked almost annoyed again, but there was curiosity in her eyes now too. "You sound very confident for someone who just got confronted by a stranger," she said. I nodded slightly. "Confidence helps in situations like this." "And why is that?" she asked, narrowing her eyes again, though the hostility was fading little by little. "Because if I look nervous," I said casually, "probably think I was guilty of something." That made her pause. For the first time since approaching me, she looked like she might actually smile. She quickly hid it, but I noticed. "Or maybe," she said, "you're just good at talking." Maybe," I admitted. Or maybe you're just interested enough to talk too." She looked at me carefully again, studying my face as if she was searching for a hidden motive. The noise of the street continued around us, but the conversation had created its own little bubble of quiet tension. "You're not even a little intimidated?" she asked. "Should I be?" I replied. She smirked slightly. "Most people would be." I shook my head gently. "Most people probably wouldn't have answered you honestly. And you think you did?" she challenged. "I know I did," I said simply. There was a small silence between us then. She shifted her weight slightly, her arms still crossed, but her posture wasn't as defensive as before. The confidence she started with was still there, but now it seemed mixed with curiosity instead of anger. "So," she said slowly, "you just walk around complimenting strangers?" "Not really," I replied. "Then why me?" she asked. I took a small breath before answering. "Because you looked like someone who needed to hear something genuine." She blinked once, clearly caught off guard again. Her tough expression faltered just a little before she looked away for a second. When she looked back at me, the intensity in her eyes had softened. "You're strange," she murmured. I smiled again, the same calm confidence I had from the beginning still in my voice. "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'm honest." But for a moment she simply stared at me, the challenge in her eyes replaced by something quieter, something thoughtful. And in that moment I realized something interesting. When she first walked toward me, she looked ready to start an argument, but now she looked like someone who didn't want the conversation to end. I was walking through the crowded street that evening, lost in my own thoughts, when everything suddenly shifted because of a single glance. I didn't even mean to stare, but something about her presence pulled my attention. She was standing near the corner of the sidewalk, arms folded, her expression sharp and confident, like someone who didn't tolerate nonsense from anyone. Our eyes met for just a second, but that second was apparently long enough for her to notice. Before I could look away, she pushed herself off the wall and walked straight toward me with quick, determined steps. My heart skipped slightly, 'cause I could already tell she wasn't approaching to say hello. She stopped right in front of me, close enough that I could see the irritation in her eyes. Then she spoke in a bold, challenging tone. "You dare look at me like that?" For a brief moment the world around us seemed quieter. Most people probably would have stumbled over their words or immediately apologized, but something about her confidence made me respond differently. I kept my calm and gave a small, relaxed smile. "Because you're beautiful," I said simply. She blinked, clearly surprised by the answer. The sharp expression on her face didn't disappear, but it shifted slightly as if she wasn't sure how to react. "You don't even know me," she replied quickly, folding her arms tighter like she was rebuilding a defensive wall. "That's true," I said, shrugging lightly. "But beauty isn't always about knowing someone's entire life story." Her eyes narrowed as she studied my face carefully. "So now you're a poet too," she said with a hint of sarcasm. I chuckled quietly. "Not really, just honest." As she tilted her head, still watching me like she expected me to mess up somehow. "Honest," she repeated, "or just another guy trying to sound smooth?" "If I were trying to sound smooth," I replied calmly, "I'd probably have a much better line prepared." For the first time, the corner of her mouth twitched like she almost smiled, but she quickly hid it. "You're very confident for someone who just got confronted," she said. "Confidence keeps conversations interesting," I answered. "Or dangerous," she replied. "Only if someone wants it to be," I said. She shifted slightly, her weight moving from one foot to the other, though her arms stayed crossed. She continued, "Most people would have looked away by now. Most people aren't standing here," I said. Her eyebrow lifted again. "So you think you're different?" "Not really," I said with a small smile. "I just don't run away from conversations." She stared at me silently for a moment, her eyes searching my face like she was trying to figure out whether I was serious or just pretending to be calm. The noise of the street continued around us, but the tension between us felt like its own little world. "You realize," she said slowly, "that staring at strangers can come off as rude." "That depends," I replied. "On what?" she asked. "On the reason for the stare," I said. "And what was your reason?" she asked immediately, as if she had been waiting to trap me with that question. I paused for a moment before answering. "Curiosity." Her expression shifted slightly again. "Curiosity about what? About why someone who looks so confident also seems like they're hiding something?" I said. Her arms loosened just a little at that, though she quickly straightened her posture again. "You think you can figure people out just by looking at them?" she asked. "No," I said, "but sometimes you can notice small things." "Like what?" she challenged. "Like the way you walked toward me," I said. "You looked angry before I even said anything." Her eyes widened just slightly before she looked away for a second. Then she scoffed lightly. "Maybe I just don't like strangers staring at me." "Fair enough," I said calmly. She looked back at me again, this time less aggressively than before. "So what now?" she asked. "You said your confident line. What's the next move?" I smiled a little wider. "Fear doesn't have to be a move. Then why keep talking?" she asked. "Because you didn't walk away," I replied. For a second she didn't say anything. The tension that started this conversation hadn't disappeared, but it had changed into something else. Something quieter, something curious. She looked at me carefully again, and this time her voice was softer when she spoke. "You're strange," she said. "Maybe," I replied. She sighed lightly, shaking her head as if she still couldn't decide whether to be annoyed or amused. "Or maybe," she added after a pause, "you're just brave enough to answer back." I remember the exact moment everything started, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it felt strangely intense for such a simple moment. I was walking down the street in the late afternoon, the sunlight fading into that soft golden color that makes everything look calmer than it actually is. People were passing by, conversations mixing with the distant sound of traffic, but my attention suddenly locked onto someone standing a few steps away. She was leaning against a railing with her arms folded tightly, her posture stiff, like she had built an invisible wall around herself. When our eyes met, it lasted barely a second, but the expression on her face changed instantly. Her brows pulled together and her lips pressed into a thin line, as if my glance had personally offended her. Before I could even think about looking away, she pushed herself off the railing and walked straight toward me with confident, almost impatient steps. My heartbeat picked up slightly, not from fear exactly, but from the sudden tension building in the air. She stopped right in front of me, close enough that I could see every detail of her expression. Her eyes were sharp and intense, almost challenging, like she was daring me to justify myself. Her chin lifted slightly, and her voice came out firm and bold. "You dare look at me like that?" Oh, for a brief second, I felt the weight of the question hanging between us. Her tone carried irritation, but underneath it there was something else too. Something guarded, like someone who had learned to expect the worst from people. I noticed the slight tightening in her jaw and the way her fingers pressed against her arms as she crossed them more tightly. Most people would have quickly apologized or stepped back, but something about the moment made me feel calm instead of nervous. I let out a quiet breath and allowed a small smile to appear on my face. Not a teasing smile, just a warm one that came naturally. Then I answered softly but confidently, "Because you're beautiful, God." The reaction on her face was immediate and impossible to miss. Her eyes widened slightly, the tension in her eyebrows loosening for a fraction of a second as surprise replaced irritation. It was clear she hadn't expected that answer at all. She blinked once, almost like she was trying to reset her expression, then quickly brought her guard back up. Her shoulders straightened, and she crossed her arms again, though this time it looked less aggressive and more like she was trying to regain control of the situation. "You don't even know me," she said, her voice still firm but noticeably less sharp than before. I watched the subtle change in her expression and gave a small shrug. "Maybe not," I replied calmly. My tone stayed relaxed, which seemed to confuse her even more. She tilted her head slightly, studying my face, as if she was searching for a hidden joke or sarcasm. Her eyes moved carefully, observing every reaction I had. There was still a hint of annoyance in her gaze, but curiosity had quietly slipped in beside it. "So you just say things like that to strangers?" she asked. Her voice carried a skeptical edge, yet it sounded more thoughtful now than confrontational. I noticed the slight tension in her shoulders easing as the seconds passed. Even though she was still standing confidently in front of me, the defensive energy she started with wasn't as strong anymore. "Not really," I answered gently, "only when it feels true," as she let out a small breath that sounded almost like a laugh, though she quickly hid it by looking away for a moment. When she looked back at me, her expression had softened just a little. The tight line of her lips had relaxed, and the anger that had been in her eyes earlier was fading into something quieter. Still, there was emotion behind that calm surface. I could see in the way her eyes lingered on my face, like she was trying to understand my intentions. "You're strange," she said under her breath. I smiled again, feeling the tension between us shift into something less hostile and more curious. "Maybe," I replied. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The world around us kept moving, people walking past, voices echoing in the distance. But it felt like the moment between us had slowed down. She finally lowered her arms slightly, though they were still loosely crossed, and her shoulders no longer looked so stiff. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than before. "Most people would just looked away," she said quietly. I met her gaze and answered honestly. "Maybe most people didn't notice what I did." Her eyebrows lifted slightly again, but this time there was no anger in the gesture. Instead, there was a hint of vulnerability flickering in her expression, like she wasn't used to conversations that felt this sincere. She studied my face for a long moment, her eyes searching carefully, and for the first time since she walked toward me, her expression wasn't guarded or irritated. It was thoughtful, almost uncertain, like she was deciding whether to trust the moment or protect herself from it. And in that quiet pause, I realized something surprising. The girl who had approached me with fire in her eyes now looked less like someone ready for a fight and more like someone slowly allowing herself to be understood.